Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another Europa Universalis IV video where we continue our tour de monde, where we look at some of the different nations in the game. Now in the last video we looked at the Ottomans, which border the two worlds of Europe and the Middle East. Now we're going to look at Muscovy, which borders the two worlds of Europe and Asia. And Asia in this case is Western Asia, which is mostly horde territory. You've got to deal with a variety of hordes and a variety of Muslim threats. And really, I find that Muscovy, you start off really on a kind of a nice edge. It's really easy for you to get in a situation where either you will steamroll an opponent and take a bunch of territory, or you will be steamrolled in return, because things start off very, very shaky. These hordes are always going to be kind of problematic to deal with, because they're going to come knocking at your door pretty regularly and want stuff from you. And they are much more powerful than you are. We've looked at some of their mechanics in terms of the cavalry, some of the modifiers they've got, and they are just very, very threatening. So as Muscovy, you've got to worry about that. Now, luckily, you can pay them off. Literally, day one, they declare war. You can turn around immediately and give them some money. Rather, for the next 5 years, I think you give them a certain percentage of your income, something like 1 or 2 gold or something per month. It hurts, but it's not. It doesn't incapacitate you, and that does buy them off for 5 years for a truce, and then they will come knocking at your door again, unless, of course, you've improved your strength. So this means you're really in a very nice edge position, and you're not going to be in a position to fight them off, especially early on. Eventually, yes, and in fact, that's the fate of the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, is to be the one power that really starts to fight back the hordes, historically speaking, and proves that they're not unbeatable, and proving that these guys who really make their entire reason to exist is to be terrifying, to look like they've never been beaten, so that they can just show up and people will say, fine, here's your money, we're not even going to bother fighting you. Once that turned around historically, Muscovy was able to really break the hordes and then expand and form the Rus nation of Russia. So that is really your number one priority as Muscovy, is to survive versus the horde and then work towards your primary goal of forming Russia. Now, much like the goal of forming Great Britain, you do need administrative tech level 10, which is really the big time limit on that. You're not going to be able to form Russia before that. Because other than that, your goals are actually relatively easy. You do need the province of Novgorod, and they have changed some of these criteria from time to time, I believe. I might be wrong, but you, at the very least, the way it is now, you need this province of Novgorod, which means your number one opponent is going to be this nation, and they start off relatively similar strength to you do. If we look at our military strength, and so, in fact, they'll be relatively close together. So we've got Novgorod down here. So they start with 14,000 men, 6,000, or so that's manpower. 6,000 total men, 14,000 manpower, for a total of about 20,000 available troops. And you start with 8,000 men there, so slightly more men, although not dominantly so, and quite a bit more manpower. So you are in a better position, but of course the big threat is always the status of alliances. That's why I always say Muscovy is very nice edge, because Novgorod, easy. It doesn't start with any alliances whatsoever, but it's going to start building them really, really quickly. And that's why you've got to double check that. Now, you also can't take Novgorod in a single attack. This is their capital, which means you can't ask for this one province in a peace treaty. You're going to have to annex the whole thing, and they're too big to annex in one shot. So it's going to be a series of wars, and each one is going to lead to a truce, which means it's going to take a certain amount of time for you to finally get this province. Now, the rest of the thing that you need for the decision is actually quite a bit easier. You need either Smolensk or Ryazan. Now, Ryazan, and I'm sure, again, I'm not pronouncing any of these remotely close to accurately, is a two-province, relatively minor nation. And again, the biggest question mark here is going to be diplomacy. Again, they start off with no alliances, but they will make them very quickly. In practice, I find it very easy to take this province. In fact, just annex the pair of them is going to be fine. And generally speaking, I don't find myself having to get into any conflict with Lithuania. In fact, the biggest problem is, especially if you're going to aggressively annex Ryazan, is, and maybe some of these other guys here or there, for example, you do not start with these guys as a vassal, right? So if you decide that you want to aggressively annex Tver, I don't know, you between them and Ryazan here and fighting Novgorod, you're going to start to accumulate a lot of aggressive expansion penalty very, very quickly. And then it would not take very much for Lithuania or Crimea to really come out on your bad side. So or you know, any of the hordes or anything like that. But I'm saying, you know, you're worried about these hordes already, the ones that border you. But it's going to start to become more and more unfriendly, and God forbid you get to the point where people can start forming coalitions against you. It starts to become quite rough. In several of my games as Muscovy, I did find it remarkably easy, actually, to make some alliances with the Teutonic Order, the Livonian Order, against Lithuania, for example, depending on how you play your diplomacy. Sweden, later on, once you have claimed all of Novgorod, there does start to be the problem of, now they don't actually have any cores to start off with, but I find that you start to get the problem where Sweden does like to try to annex over some more land over here. They will try to fabricate claims on your land over here because they've got to expand somewhere. And the situation that happens in Scandinavia, you're going to be very interested in, because if Denmark diplo annexes Sweden, just like it happened in my England game, then that starts to become very, very, very scary. Or vice versa, Sweden might win a war of independence and then come back and conquer Norway and or Denmark, and then Sweden becomes very scary, and you're going to be a neighbor at that point, so it's going to be quite concerning. Religion does play into effect pretty well. Now, as Moscow, you are an Orthodox nation, which means you don't have to worry about the Reformation to the same degree. And Lithuania is, unless I am wrong, also... No, Lithuania is Catholic. That's right. That's the other problem. If you have to go to war with Lithuania, if you want to pick up Smolensk or Bryansk, because you tend to get a lot of missions for that. Yeah, like see right here. So you've got a lot of incentive to go over here. You're going to have a lot of free cores. You don't start with any cores over here. But there's going to be a lot of missions that will give you claims in this general direction, which can bring you in conflict over here, but they are Catholic. And therefore, you have that you run the risk of aggroing, well, a bunch of Catholic nations and the defender of the faith. Now, oftentimes, the early defenders of the faith for Christianity, or sorry, Catholicism, will be Castile. And they're far enough away that they won't be a problem. But, you know, we've got some more Catholicism over here. So Sweden, exactly, like this whole sort of Catholic power block can really give you a hard time. On the other hand, when they start to have problems with Reformation, as an Orthodox nation, you can kind of sit back and laugh. Now, as the Orthodox nation, you do not have, there's no papacy to worry about. There's no Holy See to try to take control of. Instead, your mechanic is the Patriarch authority. And I find that it's a relatively simple mechanic. It's mostly a slider. At the far left end, does it not properly describe? I guess it doesn't actually show me the modifiers, which I'm surprised about. But what it does, on the far left side, it decreases... Sorry, on the far right side, with high authority, it will decrease revolt risk and give you more manpower, positive manpower modifier, which is quite strong. But the higher the patriarchal authority, the more tax money goes to the church instead of to you. So depending on if you want a lot of money or mostly you want more manpower. I find that as Muscovy, I don't have a super hard time managing the rebellion. Although you can annex pretty quickly. Again, if you're quite aggressive at grabbing Novgorod, you might have a bit of an issue. You do start with one province down here, which is actually Sunni. And of course, if you're able to start taking any land... They're shamanist over here. That's interesting. If you are able to start grabbing any land from the hordes, you're going to have more and more Muslims incorporated into your nation, and that can again cause a significant issue there. Although I found that in practice, you're not going to be grabbing this territory for quite a while. They get a huge defensive bonus on their territory from the steppes, so it's not generally something that comes up. So until later on, you're not generally going to be messing with a whole lot of Muslim or apparently shamanist religions. And so your missionaries are going to be more than enough to convert whatever you have to. In fact, more than anything, I find it to be more of a problem. Oh, so these provinces are Orthodox, but the nation itself is Catholic. That's very interesting. We're going to go through, I feel like this is a pretty good time. We've talked about their initial situation pretty well. I'm actually going to pop out into a save here. All right, so here we are in the save game from my current Muscovy game where things are going a little bit well. Again, I haven't really made a huge push into the hordes, although I did take away this province here, which has been converted to Orthodoxy. This is the one that had shamanism, which is quite interesting. And that's it, yeah. So I haven't actually made any progress against the horde, but the bright side is I haven't lost anything to them, and that is really early on my #1 goal. I believe I still have Perm as a vassal. I guess I should look at my own relationship here. Yeah, Perm is still one of my vassals. I have not diplo annexed them, but I have annexed Pskov and Yaroslav. And diplomatically so, and I have militaristically annexed all of Novgorod. So I'm actually in a perfect position if I want to. Once I get to the correct tech level, I should be able to easily form the Russian nation. In fact, that's entirely what I need. I only need administrative tech level 10. Now, really interesting things happened over here in Lithuania. I guess because, and this is what I wanted to show, the fact that they were a Catholic nation, well, they're Protestant now, apparently, the Reformation is hitting, but they were a Catholic nation, but many Orthodox provinces, and they apparently did a poor job of managing their religious situation. As such, they got to the point where, well, just a few years ago, they got huge number of rebels. I did not actually... I did not gain this territory as a result of a royal marriage or anything like that. I mean, clearly, Lithuania still exists. In fact, it didn't exist for a long time. Ukraine became separated from Lithuania. I thought there was another nation as well. Ukraine, something else, I'm not sure. And clearly, like, Smolensk has become independent as well. Now, some of these were a result of the rebellion. Some of them were the result of losing some wars and having to give up nations as independent states. And some of this, not only did the rebels just flip and become independent, some of them actually defected to me. I would be watching these rebels go, and then all of a sudden, one of these nations would turn yellow, just as they just defected to my country. It was actually the least painful way of expanding ever, which is interesting. If you go into diplomacy, you can actually see one of the covert actions available is to support rebels. And some of them will be like separatists and nationalists, and I think they were Belarusian. It's another culture is Russian. Yeah, these guys here, Belarusian. They were, I don't know, encouraging them it caused more and more of these rebels to pop up, and either they would break off as these independent states or literally defect to me. It was wonderful, it was beautiful, it was incredibly easy. Looks like Hungary is having some problems with Protestant zealots. I guess they are very likely to flip to Protestant at some point. Let's take a look at the religion map. I know we're not talking about Muscovy anymore, but I'm just quite curious to see how things are going in this game. So actually Protestant, this is actually a Protestant nation or set of nations here. And here we have Catholic nations that happen to have Protestant provinces. So it'll be really interesting to see how the actual nation states decide to play with that. So let's go look at the actual menus. We'll start with the right-hand side. Although I guess in this view, you're not able to see what Muscovy starts with as a force limit. I think it's just over 20. It's maybe 23 or 24 as a force limit. And certainly not much naval. I mean, you are landlocked to start off with. Looking at the religion, Orthodox was there. I think I discussed the patriarchal authority a little bit. Oh, I am the defender of the Orthodox faith in this game. And we can convert some people here. I suppose I could. I still only have one. No, I have 2 missionaries. I believe being the defender of the faith gives me an extra missionary. Well, that's very handy. Let's go and use that now, well, since, you know, I'm playing here. Stability and expansion. I guess there's not much to talk about here. Again, given the current state of my nation, there's certainly room for peasants to pop up. It's quite surprising, actually. I'd have to do some culture flipping, I think, over here to really have it work properly. They actually want to become a free nation. See, if the other nations were smart, they might encourage the Ukrainian nationalists. And you do get to choose. If I go over here and support rebels, there we go. I can actually see there's 2 different types of rebels, and I choose which one to support. A lot of times you might go with the ones that are stronger, but you might want to encourage separatists, especially because they're more likely to cause significant problems and make a nation more vulnerable. Mission, so again, we looked at that. I think most of the other ideas were just sort of generic, available to many different nations. And finally, the ideas. All right, so the Russian ideas, built in, we get plus 25% more manpower, which is really good, and that is really key. Now, again, the one thing you really have to worry about with Muscovy, though, is that the winter situation, it is absolutely brutal if there's the harsh winter effect going on. I'm sure there's a way to see it. I'm just completely failing at picking it up. You know what? Let's we'll unpause and we'll actually just move this guy to the far north and see what happens. Oh yeah, see the force limit is quite high. I don't think the harsh winter is kicked in. Let's move it up here. So the fact that you have more manpower is really helpful, but unfortunately, you're still you can get in positions where you lose it extraordinarily quickly, just from the winter time. So it's January. I don't know. I'm very disappointed that I can't show off the winter stuff. Oh, there we go. Severe winter. I can see it here when I mouse over in terrain mode. And I was sure it showed up somewhere, but it's like brutally extra attrition. It mostly comes up if you're fighting an offensive war, right? Which makes sense. So if you're invading Novgorod in the winter, because you're going to be outside of your own territory, it is going to just obliterate your military. You're going to run out of manpower in no time. So it's a very interesting mechanic that you're having to deal with the temperature so carefully. So you get the extra manpower, which is nice. Also, much cheaper infantry, which is good. Now, the infantry discount is nice. On the other hand, we are able to run 60% cavalry, right? So it's not as much as the hordes, for example, but it's still pretty good because cavalry is really quite strong. But the cheap infantry, it really leads to an interesting and tough decision here as Muscovy because, well, cheap, big armies, it's not that bad. And if we complete all of these ideas here, we'll eventually get an extra 100% national manpower modifier. And of course, that will come later because you're going to need to have unlocked many, many, many different ideas to be able to get that. But wow, that is a lot of manpower to throw around. By that point, you've probably formed the Russian nation, unless, of course, you've grabbed a bunch of administrative powers, and that's where you're spending your points. You also are going to spend a fair amount of points coring. I mean, obviously, coring up here is going to be a big deal, but apparently I'm going to have to, you know, I'd spent a lot of effort there, so I'm going to be a little bit behind. The actual ideas you can pick up, so Sudebnik, 10% national tax modifier. I believe as Russia, you really want to prioritize getting 3 ideas as quickly as possible because unlocking 10% extra national tax modifier is tremendous. You are never going to have a significant amount of trade going on. This is a little bit of a bad indication because it's a little later in the game. I guess Novgorod is actually worth quite a bit. Oh, there's a lot of incoming. I think I may have beaten Kazan in a war, in a defensive war, and gotten them to give me 50% of their trade power. I think that's why I'm so potent here and swinging so much trade forward. But apparently I'm lying when I said that you'll never be very significant. Now, it is a little bit later in the game, but yeah, I guess some of my income is coming from there. But the vast majority is still from taxation, right? Especially at this point, I've started to build the improvements that increase my tax base in my various provinces. So a lot of it is going to come from there, even early on. So getting that extra 10% is going to be tremendous. And frankly, getting these offensive ideas, I think, makes a huge difference as well, because you really are going to be defending from the hordes quite often and getting into some wars over here to solidify your territory. At this point, you can cruise quite a bit more and worry about your internals. But it really is imperative that you win a few early wars. And so getting those offensive ideas and then unlocking this, huge. Bigger force limit modifier. So not only do you have a huge manpower, and not only can you get very cheap infantry, but you've got a very high force limit as well. So I've talked about before in my previous videos that when you're trying to figure out the balance between cavalry and infantry, one of the things you're keeping in mind is that one regiment of infantry, 1,000 men, costs you just as much force limit and just as much manpower as a unit, a single regiment of cavalry, 1,000 men there as well. So you want to try to max out your force power, probably with as much cavalry as possible, just to take advantage of your force limit and manpower as much as possible, with the exception that cavalry is much more expensive, and that much more so as Russia here, because these are the Russian ideas. These are not going to change when you become Russia, for example. So there's a lot of incentive to really have a high infantry army there as well. Next things you get are improved manpower recovery speed, which is really nice. Again, I have currently, my maximum manpower is about 80,000, and that's how much I will get over a 10-year period, although that's accelerated by my army tradition and will also be unlocked or accelerated even further by getting the I gotta stop just trying to say any of this, but further by getting this national idea unlocked. So in practice, this is going to take me, you know, I'm not going to do the math, but, you know, I might be recovering in 7 years or maybe even 6 years, depending on how many pluses I start to pile on here. And that is a lot of men coming back really quite quickly. Here we've got 10% production efficiency, which will mostly tie into this line here. And again, frankly, I still get more money out of production than actual trade. Ideas. Siberian frontier, derp, +1 colonists. So there is the possibility of colonizing over here. That's a wasteland, but these are not, right? These are just simply uncolonized. And if I start to get some colonists, I can start to colonize over here. Now, I don't think there's enough land to colonize as Muscovy to justify getting one of the colonization ideas, either exploration or expansion. I don't think it's worthwhile getting those. And you don't need it, apparently, because you will get a colonist for free at some point, assuming you keep getting your national ideas, and that is certainly pretty nice. More yearly army tradition, which translates to faster manpower, which translates to more morale bonus, right? Your army tradition gives you a built-in morale bonus, and then the morale bonus in combat, recovery speed as well. Plus, when you create a great general, you will also just get higher quality generals, so that's also quite nice. 10% cheaper technology cost. That is really nice because you are in the Eastern Tech Group, so 20% extra cost to your technologies. It's not deal-breaking, but it's certainly not great. And I think you're probably less likely to westernize here, because westernize is quite harsh because you do lose all your stability and all your current saved up power. So it's pretty harsh. With the 20% penalty there and the fact that you're going to get about 10% of it back over here, I think you can manage to stay as an Eastern power to the end of the game, I suspect. I haven't actually played Muscovy all the way through to the end, so maybe I can't judge, but there you have it. So Tech Group, Eastern, not much else to say about here. So yeah, trade is interesting because, again, there are a lot of land-based trade routes. That is mostly what you are getting. And it's possible that later on in the game, that especially as the route around Africa is discovered, a lot of this land-based trade may start to dry up. Again, I haven't really played Muscovy until the late game, but that's always the threat, that the European powers will increase their trade range dramatically and will just funnel more and more of it around the coast where they're going to have all their colonies, and then finally directly into their actual nations and bypassing you completely. So trade is always a little problematic. On the other hand, I mean, you're going to be in a position where you can control quite a bit of it later on, just through sheer size, right, and provincial control, especially if you're able to punch down here. I think, to the Caspian Sea, you'll be in pretty good potential position. And that's the thing. These hordes are considerably more powerful than you early on, but you will out-tech them. Even being an Eastern Tech Group, that is still better than the, I think, 50% penalty that these guys are going to be suffering with. So at some point, you're going to surpass them. Yeah, and I think that's probably that. Government, despotic monarchy. And, yeah, Muscovy. Heck of a lot of fun to play. Very, very fun. You're outside of the hardest political stuff, so you have to dabble with the European politics to a certain extent, but you're not really, it's not going to be brutally evident. You just have to worry about a handful of neighbors and then their interconnections. That's, assuming you're not going straight up war against Lithuania, and that's it. I was able to get through all this without going into actual war with Lithuania. Going to war with a Catholic Lithuania early on, that'll be tough. But once that Reformation starts, I think there's a real potential to punch through there quite a bit. Anyway, that is it for my Muscovy/Russia video. And next time, well, maybe we'll keep arcing around here and we'll take a look at the Scandinavian nations. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.